This House will come to order. Today we will consider the motion. This House would legalize euthanasia, and we will see a debate in the World Schools Debating Championship format. And I invite the first speaker for the proposition team to take the floor and address the House.
Marie lived in Belgium, exactly at the time when they considered the legalization of euthanasia in Belgium. Marie was a woman who had cerebral paralysis. I don't remember exactly her story, but I remember her picture in the magazine. Marie couldn't move. She could barely talk. She couldn't communicate, and her life was basically over. She didn't have anything to cheer about. She didn't have anything to hope for, except from a peaceful, dignified death. Marie was in the magazines and in the newspapers at that time because this was this critical time where people started to talk about the possibility of legalization for euthanasia. And Marie was there because her family, all of the people who supported her, all of the people who she spent all her life with, made this public and put some effort into this, put effort and their wishes into that she, no thank you, would be able to die a dignified, a peaceful death that she deserves. What the government side here stands for is that euthanasia should be legalized. And we will show you why in three major points of our argumentation. First one, all the freedoms are based on the fact that we are free from suffering. Second argument, the doctors must always take care into patients' best interest. And the third point of analysis, euthanasia preserves human dignity. Now let's first take a look at, in order to have this debate better and to know through all the time what we're talking about, first I will present you the definition of euthanasia, and then I will present you the model of how we would execute this. No, thank you, madam. I think this is necessary for you to hear if you want to take track of the debate. Euthanasia is assistance to terminally ill people to die painlessly. Now, what we would do, we would take the model of Oregon, which we think is very good. In order to have this euthanasia, a person has to be over 18 years old. This means that he is in legal terms mature and capable of making decisions on his or her own. He has to make 2 oral and 1 written request for euthanasia, and it has to pass at least 15 days between the first and the last request for euthanasia. Also, the person must have less than 6 months of life expectancy from this point on. In order to get this plea for euthanasia accepted, we have to have a second medical consultant which would give the medical opinion about the situation this person's in, and both physicians have to agree that this person is capable of making reasonable decisions on their own and that their mind is not impaired by anything, so that they can make this decision reasonably and as they want it, not because of anything else. Now let's take a look at our 2 arguments. First one, everyone is free to be free from suffering. Now, if we go back to basics, we can see that the essence of our society and the concept of human freedom and human rights and everything is based on one important principle. Human beings should be free from suffering. All the rights that we have basically embody this. The rights protect us from abuse, the rights protect us from emotional pain, the rights protect us from physical pain, the rights protect us from loss of our dignity, and this is why we have these rights and why we have the freedoms. Now, people that seek for euthanasia are in great pain. Those people usually do not have any will to live. They desire to die as soon as possible. This is what you have to understand. Their life, no thank you, their life is already very near the end. And now what should the state do? One thing that the state can do is say, no, whatever is your state, whatever you wish, whatever you feel, no matter how much it hurts you, you should not die. You should not die because we say you should not die, because we say that the human life is so sacred, just a second, sir, and so on and so forth. And even in such cases where people desire death more than anything, you should not die. Please, sir, what did you say about this?
Why must we use the state and ingrain the state in this process for people to decide when to end their lives? Is there no other way for this to happen except for the state to do so?
Well, the state does not do so. The person chooses that he or she wants to end their life. The state does not go around. I don't know, I think you misunderstood what I'm talking about. People from the state are not going around in hospitals and deciding who is that terminally ill that he or she should die. But the person must request it by himself. Then request is examined and then it's approved. And the only role that the state has here is that the state allows this person to die a dignified death when he or she wants it. Now, what the state can do is to save those people from suffering. And we can see that on this is also based the right that we have to die, that also European Convention of Human Rights states that this is so. We have a right to die and we have a right to choose when and how we want to die. And this is exactly because of this. Because in the case of suffering, in the case where people see no way out of this, where people have nothing else to do and nothing to expect, and basically their only wish is to die, the only thing basically left that the country can do to help them away from this harm and to preserve them from this harm is to let them die. Please, sir.
Even though you believe that it's a human right, many cultures and many religions feel that the right to die is not absolute and that people shouldn't be able to kill themselves. How do you square having a government make a theological decision that a large population in the country is going to disagree with?
Well, I am a Catholic, and if I'm going to be in a deathbed, I will not decide I want to die. But, for example, a person I know, Anya or Yanne or whoever else who is not a Catholic and who sees that this kind of death is acceptable, and if they're gonna feel like this, they should have all the rights to do this. And this is all about personal decision. Now let's take a look at our second point we were making here, and it's also very connected with what Yanne will be talking about furthermore. Doctors have to act in patients' best interest. This is basically the purpose of medicine. Why doctors are here? Doctors are here to help the patients, to do the best they can to improve their situation and to improve their health. Patients that come into the hospital are in different degrees of pain or suffering or disease or whatever. And at each stage of this disease, the doctor has to do everything that is in his power to cut this suffering, to make it lesser. Now, when the suffering reaches the point where there is nothing else to be done to decrease this suffering, where there is nothing else that the physician can do to help, and the only thing that remains is for the physician to help, is to be there to say, okay, now your moment has come. You can push this button. You're gonna get this pill or you're gonna get this injection, and everything will fade very slowly. You will die without any pain. Nothing else will be wrong in your life, and this is what you deserve. This is what the doctor has to do, because the doctor in every point of his work or his job is to work in patient's best interest and to make patient's life, even if it's the last second of patient's life, to make his life as good as he can.
Thank the lady for her remarks, and I call on Sam Natali to open the debate for the opposition.
Filip, ne pozabite, prosim, da si timer pokaže. Ne boš?
Lahko jim kaže, če Filip daš timer, oziroma kdorkoli mi da.
Daj, ker Filip zdaj kaže. Pa kaže jim, veš, vmes.
It's 8 minutes, right?
Yeah.
8, ja.
Yeah.
It is no secret that as humans we all fear death. It's something within us that causes us to pull back. It's not just the end of life. I mean, a live body has as many particles in it as a dead body does, so there's no physical difference, but obviously we know the difference between what's alive and what's dead. And so that's why it's so hard in an emotionally charged situation like this to really step back and take this rationally. to take this in a spirit of logic because of that fear. But once you move past it and see euthanasia not as life or death, but as a possible medical treatment to consider, then we get to the heart of it. And this is why I'd like to make a clarification that keeping euthanasia illegal doesn't remove individual rights. A person of age can always deny medical treatment. It's part of their sovereignty. It's part of the principle of autonomy that currently guides medicine. But what we can do is restrict doctors. There's a precedent with pharmaceuticals. If an individual has the right to be free, then theoretically they should be able to take whatever prescription drugs they want. However, a government does currently restrict what drugs and what treatments are acceptable. In this way, we believe that when you view euthanasia as a treatment, it does not hold up to the medical principles that we believe medicine should be guided by. And so, my first two reasons that I'm going to address are that the preference for life is vital to the stability of the healthcare system. Two, that legalizing euthanasia is fraught with pragmatic difficulties. And three, which my partner will address, is that fallible institutions should not be able to make final and ultimate decisions that are irreversible. So let's get right into my matter. First of all, the precedent for life is vital to the stability of the healthcare system. The principle is based on the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. Although many people don't follow the Hippocratic Oath today, it lives on as a legal standard that is recognized in virtually every country that has doctors of a standard of care. You have a certain standard of care, and the standard of care is based on doing what is best for the life and health of the patient. Yes, ma'am.
But Hippocratic Oath also states that no doctor should ever prescribe a prescription for abortion. So
I'm saying that that's why we don't use it. I'm just explaining the historical background. The fact is that it's the basis of modern medicine, and you can't have modern medicine unless you look at this. Now, even though that part has been discredited by some, the basis of the standard of care is really what we're looking at. Not the Hippocratic Oath, but the basis of standard of care. And the standard of care says that you have to provide a certain level of care. And what that level of care is it prevents doctors from performing or not giving treatment out of convenience. It prevents doctors from giving one patient priority over another. It prevents doctors from acting in their own self-interest. And when we get rid of that principle for the preference of life and the preference of care, you fall into a massive ethical dilemma. And the reason for this is because this is the core of doctor-patient ethics. The basic reason we trust doctors is because it is their job to extend our lives. It is their job to look out for our lives. And if I'm not sure that the doctor is going to guard my life in all cases, then there's a basic breakdown of the fundamental trust between doctors and patients that allows our medical system to operate. Furthermore, let's look at how this would feel for a doctor. A doctor has a sense of purpose. A doctor is driven to protect life. And when they're no longer protectors of life, they could be killers, they could be slingers of drugs, they could be, how will they be perceived by the public when this is removed? Yes, sir.
How come we didn't have such a catastrophic breakdown of care in Belgium or Oregon when we legalized euthanasia?
Well, because in these places, this was determined by the value set of the people, because these are both very, very progressive places. But in most places, and especially places where religion still holds a lot of sway, in places like your country and mine, this is not something that's going to go down well with people, even for a significant minority. This is a concern. Second thing is the pragmatic difficulties that are associated with this. Once you remove the principle, abuses will occur. With families, with the cost of healthcare, no doubt there are going to be families who would rather have an older member that they see as a burden die than to take care of them. This is heartbreaking, but it has happened, and it will happen. In the same way, with insurance and socialized medicine, many doctors would have an incentive to save their own company money by recommending this policy. Clearly, we don't want to create a system where a government or a doctor has an incentive for someone to die. And in order to prevent that, we must say that, no, you cannot prescribe a medicine that will kill someone. Furthermore, Furthermore, they had this elaborate plan to, you know, try and ascertain the level to make sure that it's recognizing someone's autonomy to make the decision. But this is very difficult. In a hospital environment where there's already drugs present in the system, would you have to take someone off of painkillers in order to get their assent? What if they're elderly? And again, what if they're being pressured by these outside forces to make a decision for euthanasia? This is a big concern. And I believe that in order to prevent these kinds of abuses, a government has a mandate, a duty, to protect vulnerable populations that could be swayed. And in light of this duty, they must affirm for life in order to prevent this. So, I'm going to go into the couple of points they made. The first one is the principle of freedom that they talked about, that all people are free. And of course, all people are free. A person always has the right to refuse treatment. A person always has the right to stop going to the doctor. And that's fine. They have that whether or not euthanasia is legal. Well, government can't restrict that, but what a government can restrict is what the doctor is able to do to the patient. For instance, you know, not long ago, we thought that taking out parts of people's brains in order to cure all kinds of mental diseases, you know, like only 40 years ago, homosexuality was listed in the DSM-4 as a disease. And so the government decided that is not an acceptable way to treat, that lobotomies are not acceptable. In the same way, a government has a right to tell doctors that death is not an acceptable treatment for an illness. And this is the principle on which freedom goes out the window. The individual always has the freedom to decide, but there are limits on what they can choose to have a doctor do. We're not restricting the individual, we're restricting doctors. The second thing is their principle of the doctor has to try and mitigate suffering. But again, there are limits on this. Currently, we have a lot of drugs, a lot of treatments, a lot of palliative care. We have, we have ways to die with dignity. We have hospices. We have a system in place to make the passing as comfortable as possible. And of course, a doctor could take away a lot more of the pain if they were willing to drug the person into oblivion by giving them far more morphine than is stable. But that is not an acceptable use of the medical tools that the government has approved for them. So when you look at euthanasia as a medical tool, we see that it is not right to use, is fraught with problems, and that when you consider it like this, it's very clear that this is not a form of medicine that the government should affirm.
I thank the gentleman for his remarks. Now I call on Yurnay Yanko to address the House for the proposition team.
Čas mjeri Žan, 50%. Yeah.
Side opposition would like you to believe that as soon as we legalize euthanasia, that we're going to have some kind of a fundamental breakdown in healthcare. What we on the side government say, well, we've done that and it's worked quite well. We've had that in Oregon, we've had that in Belgium, we've had that in quite a few places all over the world, and in fact the healthcare there is still working. Doctors aren't taking advantage of people, people are not getting abused, and we say it works quite fine. And we're going to see how our proposal in fact would work quite fine in the future if we implement it. First of all, let's see what they told us about their arguments. Then we'll talk about what they told us about our arguments, which I hope we managed to extract because it was kind of mumbled into the whole thing. And then we're going to talk about the constructive manner, how this preserves human dignity and also in the eyes of the family. First of all, they talked about the principle. And they talked for quite a bit of time about the Hippocratic Oath. And we have a point of information which basically, displays how this Hippocratic Oath is completely obsolete. We no longer use it, quite a few parts of it. And they say, oh, well, we're just telling about it because it's a nice historical example. We say it has no place in today's society. We say it has no rule that needs to be followed 100%. And we say that we've seen that with abortion, and we say that it can be adapted to a certain extent so as to facilitate human dignity in our current society. We've done it once, it helped progress, we're going to do it again. And they say, it went well in a few countries, but it's not going to go well in very religious countries. We on the side of the government would resent the notion that you cannot do what you want if some guy down the street does not agree with you. We resent the notion that the government would facilitate a person to assert his control over another person when he clearly has no right to intervene in such a situation. And we say that is simply unacceptable. And they talk about how doctors are going to have incentives to kill people. We say, side a position, get your game straight, you're completely misrepresenting doctors. We say doctors are doing their job because they want to help people. They're there because they're doing their job. They're not some kind of panic peddling people taking advantage of others, and we say that is completely false. Yes, please.
On that point, within hospital environments today, in this country where people don't have insurance, you wouldn't believe how fast a hospital would turn someone out if they were costing too much to pay for.
Yeah, well, that's simple, because no one is going to pay, and doctors need to eat, just like we need to. I'm sure that doctors, if they're going to have their wage paid, that they're going to do the best they can. And they do that in Europe. In some countries, they get paid very little, but they do help people. And it's as simple as that. And we say that doctors are simply not going to go there, and that they're going to do the best job they can. And when we talk about the freedom of suffering, they tell us about how sometimes we don't have to go to the dentist, and that sometimes freedoms are violated. We say that this is simply incomparable, and we say that this is a much more serious issue, and you cannot trivialize it as easily as they have. So we say, we need to look at how the system works. We need to make sure that the people don't suffer. We talk about how doctors need to provide the best care they can. And they talk about how they need to provide life. But what we say, in certain cases, if it's the better choice, if people want it, if they're suffering really, really badly, and we're going to talk about examples where they suffer really, really badly in the next argument, we say that sometimes the best choice is euthanasia. It's as simple as that. Now moving on to human dignity. You see, sometimes the last days of a human being can be quite terrible. For example, we've got lung cancer, where people are basically immobilized in their bed for months at an end, and they have these tubes coming out of their chest. And basically when a person dies, they die because there isn't enough tubes to suck out all the water. They put in up to 8 tubes, 10 tubes, just sucking out water continuously. And when we see, when someone has cerebral paralysis, they're unable to move, they can't move their hands, all that. They can't move their hands, they can't move at all, they can barely speak, and we see that they're in fact in a very, very bad position. And we say that they're just reduced to a former shell of themselves. They're no longer what they used to be. Their former glory is gone. They've lost their dignity, and they're in a terrible position that at no time they wanted to be in. And we say it is simply unacceptable to make them suffer through those last 6 months. And we say it is simply unacceptable to make sure that they have to suffer through that. And we say sometimes morphine just doesn't work. We need to go beyond that. We say it is important that we don't make those people suffer. And another thing you have to understand, the last memory that stays behind the person is the memory in the eyes of the family. And to most of people, that is very, very important. They make sure, people need to be remembered. They want to be remembered as well as they can in the eyes of their family. And we human beings only live for 100 years, and after that we're gone. And we want to be remembered, and that is our final legacy. That is, in most times, the only legacy we have, how our family remembers us. And we say, when we have patients dying in terrible ways in hospitals, where they're just reduced to these human beings with tubes out of them, where they can no longer talk, when they can no longer interact with their family, when they are no longer capable of expressing emotions, we say that that memory is compromised, and we say that is terrible. Yes, please.
So you believe that someone's life is no longer considerable as a life when they're sick and infirm, that their life is somehow ready to be given away, while a fully healthy person's life is not?
No, I'm not saying that. You know, we're not making the decision for them. If they want to make that difficult decision, if they go through the whole process, you know, they have to give one consent and then another one 15 days later, we say that in that occasion, we need to follow that, because otherwise, the last thing that is going to stay behind them in the eyes of the family, their legacy, is going to be of a person reduced to a being coming with tubes coming out of him. And we say that is a terrible, terrible way to die. And we say that no one should have to go through that. And we say that no one should have to force their family, or should have his family see them in such a state. We say that we do not want to facilitate something like that, and we do not want to force something like that upon someone, and if someone wishes to decide against that, they should be able to. It's as simple as that. So what do we see? I think that euthanasia, when we look at it, in the last 6 months, I don't think there's any reason why we should prohibit it. It can be done effectively, it's been done effectively, and we say we shouldn't force anyone to go through those last few days and see their family suffer and see how his image is being degraded in the eyes of his family. We say that is simply terrible.
I thank the gentleman for his remarks, and I now call on Lucas Caress to address the House on behalf of the opposition.
All right, let's get right into it, shall we? No fancy anecdotes, no fancy introductions. Let me just get right into the refutation and then go on to expound on my point, which is that fallible agents should not be allowed to make absolute, final, and irreversible decisions. First, going right into some of the refutation that they said. One of their first points was that people have a freedom from suffering. And we agree, people should have a freedom from suffering, but as I raised in my point of information, which was kind of shrugged off, you're out of order. I see no reason why we need to involve doctors, hospitals, and the bureaucracy of the healthcare system into people's decisions about their final moments, into the decision of refusing treatment. Because the individual autonomy never goes away, because people have a responsibility, or people have an opportunity not to go to a doctor. People have an opportunity not to take the prescriptions that will extend their life. People have an opportunity to do with their bodies as they please. And we say that they will have this autonomy whether or not you legalize euthanasia. So we don't believe that euthanasia is inextricably tied to autonomy. Autonomy goes far beyond that and is far deeper and is far much more present in our society. Also, they made the point that those without hope or any reason to smile deserve a dignified death. And you heard this phrase actually a couple even more times throughout the second speech, dignified death. Well, we on the opposition have several terms with this, not only the phrase, but also the way they would like to institute this phrase into this conversation. Number one, we do not believe that it is the job of the government to legalize or make illegal dignified deaths, because we do not believe it is the job or responsibility of the government to determine and define what is dignity. Because that's a very slippery slope to embark upon, and you know that there are varying degrees of what dignity is. And here's one of them right now. They seem to say that those that are wasting away at the end of their lives are decaying. They say that it's ugly. They say that it's a terrible thing that these people who are at the end of their life cycle. Well, we on the opposition say, not so fast, not necessarily. Dignity can exist in many different forms. And consider the fact that maybe we could embrace the notion that somebody's natural life cycle is being ended, and that this is the way they are going out naturally. It is more dignified to say, I'm in too much pain, I give up, press the button, give me the pill, give me the medicine and chemicals that are going to kill me. No, we say it's much more dignified to stand up and say we are going to fight for our natural lives, the natural duration, and the way that we were supposed to come and, yes, go on this earth. It is a beautiful part of life's natural cycle, and we believe that that is a dignity you are taking away, and you are using the government to take away, which is even more embarrassing.
Sir, please.
Yes, sure.
You just said that it's nobody's right to decide what is dignified death, and then you continued your sentence by saying what is dignified death.
Well, no, I'm saying, one, because there are so many different notions of what dignity is, it was irresponsible to place that into government law, into the law books. And then, not only is it irresponsible regardless of what you think dignity is, but if you believe, as we do, that beauty is and natural life is dignity, then additionally, you must side with the opposition. Involving doctors and bureaucracy into this notion is unnecessary, and it's also very dangerous, as my new matter will explain. Fallible agents should not be allowed to make absolute, final, and irreversible decisions. Medicine is fallible. Symptoms, prescriptions, doctors, and even patients are imperfect, and they make mistakes. Suicide, meanwhile, assisted or otherwise, is an absolute decision. There is no going back, no reversal process, no opportunity to reconsider what has been done. So, it is therefore dangerous and irresponsible to weave together the fallible practice of healthcare and the irreversible act of euthanasia for these following reasons. One, symptoms and diagnoses can be wrong. A diagnosis that patient has X years to live can be incorrect, even though the doctors often do not present it as such. And if you've ever been to the doctor, you know they are very often very confident in their diagnosis. And when they say something like, you have this, that's what you're being told, and with your trust in the doctor. Yes, sir.
That's why we require two diagnoses. We say we can be reasonably.
Two diagnoses can be wrong too, sir. There is no end to the possibility of human error, as we all know. So first of all, symptoms and diagnoses can be wrong. Okay, meaning that a person who believes they have a terminal illness may not actually have that terminal illness. And second, people can be wrong. Doctors can misinterpret symptoms, but they can also be more than just incorrect. They can be wrong. One very serious concern that my partner brought up was that euthanasia will be used to defray healthcare costs. And it's beautiful that they have this idea that doctors are not always picky pension guys. But here in America, when we have to rely on our HMOs and rely on our crappy employee-based healthcare systems, when we have to rely on every single person having an individual responsibility to have healthcare, then you have a much very different system where, in fact, a couple months ago, a person who was waiting in a California emergency room died while waiting for 6 hours to be taken care of. If you don't think that's a place where people will be using euthanasia to defray healthcare costs, then you are very, very misguided. Terminally ill patients cost a lot of money to maintain, okay? And a doctor forced with either caring for a terminally ill patient or caring for someone with a prospect for living, with their back up against the wall, they have to make that terrible decision of how to use those finite resources. They might make the wrong decision. And they might make the wrong decision either willingly or unintentionally. And that is not an option we believe they should have. They should not be able to evaluate the person who is terminally ill, should we kill them. That is not something that they should have the right to say. Additionally, moving on to the patient side of the equation now. Patients who request euthanasia might not be in a healthy, stable enough state of mind to make such a decision. There's a good chance, as my partner stated, that they are already on some type of medication, such as painkillers, that might be swaying their judgment or decision capabilities. And they might also be so traumatized by their diagnosis, which may not even be correct, or so fearful at the prospect of wasting away, undignified, as they might say, that they make a rash decision. One that they might regret had they the opportunity. But as I have said to you, death is irreversible. Death is one thing that you cannot come back from. Death is one thing that we should not be basing fallible human decisions upon. Okay? And I think that is something very important here, because when you have all of these harms, here's something I would like to say, and that we on the opposition are proud to say. If it goes wrong just once, it's too much. If one doctor makes a wrong diagnosis that leads to euthanasia incorrectly or unnecessarily, that's too much. Because one human life being lost needlessly or unnecessarily is too much for this quote-unquote ambiguous term of human dignity. We believe that having the human lives that are here now and that we have and that we must take the best care of is our responsibility and that's our duty. And that there are so many harms for fairly little benefits, fairly little advantages, for a sense of autonomy which exists anyways, because autonomy exists without your right to decide you want to be euthanized, because you still have the right not to go to the doctor, you still have the right not to take those pills, you still have the right not to have those tubes in your arms. How is that not human dignity and autonomy, my friends? So, furthermore, they say, well, they're putting together this Oh, I love how they used Oregon as an example too, because I was just looking up some statistics about my home state of Oregon, which is the only U.S. state used to use euthanasia, and as many as 15% of those who are given euthanasia in Oregon did not show the adequate symptoms that are required by the alleged standard for being euthanized. So even one of those is too much. Do not take one life and vote opposition. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman for his remarks, and now I recognize Anya to speak on behalf of the proposition team.
One thing is certain about the side of the opposition. They have never seen a person dying. They have never been faced with the suffering that such people go through. They have never seen the families and people actually there on their bed, suffering horrible pain, suffering not even conscious states because of the doses of morphine they have to withstand, suffering even when they're put into a coma, so to even ease their suffering, but their brain waves still show that they are still feeling pain even though they are in a coma. Even though they are not unconscious, they're still feeling pain. There is nothing left to these patients in the whole world except for one single thing. Pain and pain and pain and pain. And the only thing that they want is for us to give them relief. The only thing they want from us is to let them go, to let them die. I know this is an extremely horrible notion to comprehend. We know that this is an extremely difficult and irreversible decision, but it is a decision tens of thousands of people make every year, in countries where it is allowed, in countries where it isn't. Tens of thousands of cancer patients suffering, for example, lung cancer, are screaming for relief every year when they are drowning in their own lung fluid, filling their lungs, who are drowning at their own living conscious selves. Tens of thousands of cancer patients feel such pain that no drug available to mankind can relieve it. And what does the side of the opposition state on this? We do not care. We believe that staying alive is more important than having a dignified ending. We believe that the staying alive is more important than not feeling pain. We believe that it is better for the doctor not to look away from these horrible decisions than to help the patient. Because it isn't the job of the doctor to keep the patient alive as long as it can. Because if that was so, we would never switch off the respiratory apparatus of brain dead people. What is the doctor's true job is to help the person. And sometimes, no matter how distressed our society is with the term of death, this is the only, and we are stating here, the only, just a second, sir, way to help the person. Yes, sir.
So why can a person not make this decision and do this act on their own without inheriting the doctors and therefore all of the harms that we have listed?
So, yes, how the process of euthanasia was explained for our first speech and for our second speech is that a patient signs the papers, requests for the drug that will help him get a peaceful death, a non-painful death, and he or she presses the button, or for example, if he or she cannot do that, he or she blinks, so the drug is released into his or her own vein. So exactly, the act of suicide is being made by the patient itself. The doctors do prepare the apparatuses, but the doctors do not administer the lethal doses themselves. So if the patient would not want to commit suicide, it would can simply state no matter what kind of the process. So it is everything in the hands of the patient themselves, and this has been constantly negated through our whole line, that it is in fact all in the hands of the patients. So if we look at your line, it is all that the preference to life is vital. I believe I have already dealt with that the preference to life is not always vital, that the preference to not feel pain and be a dignified human being is more vital. Your second argument, that it is not in the hands of the doctor and that we should not subject the doctor to do so. But the doctor themselves aren't actually administering the last shot. It is still the person's decision. The doctors themselves only help the person to feel less and less pain towards the moment when he or she cannot bear anything more. And as for their permanent decisions, doctors constantly have to make decisions with permanent effects. If that wouldn't be so, we would not allow doctors to amputate our limbs because, hey, maybe it isn't gangrena. Well, but we still have to cut off the limb, or maybe it isn't cancer, but we still have to cut off the limb. Maybe it isn't cancer in the kidneys, but we still have to cut off one kidney. Doctors constantly have to make permanent decisions, and with our plans, we are implicating. I don't know. We suggest this too, but there can be 3, 5, 10. I don't know how many doctors. It doesn't matter. What matters is what the patient feels. And as for your third argument, which is that the dangers of it. We have been seeing throughout those countries that the dangers aren't such. We've been seeing in Belgium that has universal healthcare that the doctors aren't using it simply to get rid of their terminally ill patient. But if the doctors would be using it, they would be using it also in the today's system. Because if they seem only thing they would want was an empty bed, they can simply sneak around at night to the deathbed of the person and administer a drug in maybe a higher quantity to make it lethal. They would not go throughout the whole process of bureaucracy, of preparing the patient, of counseling, or dealing with other experts to simply get one bed free. Now to continue with the side of the government, what was presented on the side of the government. We have been giving you constantly the viewpoints from the side of the patient, not from the points of society, what other people may feel, because we believe that our death should be our own and the decisions to be made with our death should be made only by us. We have been giving you all the reasons. We have been painting you a picture why such patients wish so terribly to make their end. We have been giving you, we have been painting you pictures of the suffering. We have given you a model that works in numerous countries and that would admit the patient to change his or her mind in any way. We have been giving you the role of the doctor, how the doctor's role is to help his or her own patient in any way. And if he or she cannot ease the pain, even with putting a patient in a coma, we believe that he or she should help the patient simply to let go. And last but not least, what we have given you is simply the preservation of a human dignity. Imagine a person, a professor of physics, degraded to a simple little deathbed. Nothing more. Maybe he or she can even just blink with one eye. The lungs are filling up with fluids, families crying all around, and they cannot let him go. They cannot let him go peacefully when he or she decides. This person was an authority over his or her own body throughout his life, but we cannot give him peace in the last moments of his life. Ladies and gentlemen, just one final thought before I retire back to my seat. We are giving mercy to our pets, to our cats and dogs, but we cannot give this mercy, this last mercy to our parents.
I thank the lady for her remarks, and I call on Karen Nelson to address the House for the opposition side of this debate.
Okay, you ready? Okay. So I found it interesting, the approach that the proposition has taken. They've continually talked about, okay, this is the individual. We need to look at the individual. And they've accused us of really not taking into account what the individual really feels and what is really best for them. But I think they have overshadowed and overstepped a few of their points. I mean, I just want to tell them a little story. So as we've continually mentioned, there have been so many medical errors. I have personally dealt with one in my family where my mother had a simple procedure. She simply had her thyroid taken out. Now, there was a hematoma that occurred directly after the surgery, and she had a second surgery to fix it. Now, for 3 days afterwards, she could not breathe without air support. She didn't think for one moment about somehow ending her life because she didn't have a daily function that she could do. Breathing is a part of our everyday lives. We can't survive without breathing. Not for 1 minute. Instead, she focused on positive things. She focused on getting out and riding her bike again, things that she loved to do. And through surgery and through correctness, she was able to do that and attain her everyday life and everyday activities again. Now, I want to hone some of the points that the opposition has made. They have said that within the healthcare system, we believe that somehow it will become destructive. Now, our main point is that we just believe that this is morally wrong. There are so many mistakes and inaccuracies that occur within the healthcare system. It is a major issue that we face in the international system today. And we want to focus specifically on restraints on the rights of doctors and this decision of euthanasia. We aren't saying that doctors can't prescribe some sort of ailment if you break your arm or if you have to have some sort of limb taken out. We are saying that they specifically can't prescribe the right to end your life. That is what we specifically want to get out. Now, on our side, we also mentioned pragmatism. Now, the doctor and its role with treatment and the procedure itself. One study found that a rate of 20% of misdiagnosis occurred in the ICU for serious conditions such as stroke, heart attack, and meningitis. These are very serious diseases and very serious ailments, and this is misdiagnosis. It occurs continually. No, thank you. We are asking that you recognize that and the inaccuracies that occur. Doctors make decisions based on their belief and best idea of how to treat these people, and it's not always right. They make decisions. They mess up, and we believe that sometimes, no thank you, this can occur, and we need to find the best result for that. Now, the second speaker, he talked about how they are a former shell of themselves. Yes.
I believe that the last stadium of cancer is pretty precise and pretty accurate prediction of what's going to happen to you.
Thank you for bringing up that point. That's something that you actually mentioned in one of your first speeches. You said that they have to have some sort of specific term to be defined as terminally ill. Now, there are some individuals who are diagnosed with cancer in very early stages and are giving a diagnosis of when they're going to end their lives. It could be 6 months. They could be what they believe to be perfectly healthy with cancer. They're not in the final stages. You never defined that specifically in your first speech. You just said terminally ill. Now, to get to my next point. He said a former shell of themselves, that they are left to this, he kind of played it off to be this some sort of poor image of themselves that's kind of left after all this treatment and after going through all of these hospitals and everything. This is somewhat ridiculous. We believe that they should actually look at the memory of the individual themselves because they believe that they should look at the memory of the individual. We believe that this individual needs to be looked at for the strength that they have to fight these diseases. It takes a great deal of strength morally and physically to fight these diseases. People go through a lot of different ordeals, and we believe that they should also look at their strength and the fact that they can go through these proper treatments if they actually are properly medicated and go through the healthcare system correctly, and they can come back to that future self. And as she said, she continually tried to hone in on the point of pain. They talked about it in the first speech. They talked about a dignified death. They talked about how people don't want to feel physical or emotional pain. Physical and emotional pain is an everyday part of people's lives. You feel pain if you step on a rock and you're walking around. Oh, it hurts me. I feel pain. It's something that people have to deal with in their everyday lives. And it's something that we want to allow people to keep doing not in the sense of we want them to feel pain, in the sense of we want them to be able to live and to be able to go through their lives and take it to that step. No, thank you. And the final point that I want to touch on is they kind of ignored the fact that how are these individuals in their right minds to really make these decisions. They have talked about how there has to be two different medical opinions over whether or not these people can make these decisions. She talked about how someone can decide if they are going to live or die by a wink. I think that's ridiculous. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. People are highly medicated when they are this ill. They are in severe pain. I think we both agreed on this. So how can they really make these decisions? How are they in their right mind? And if we believe that they are not in their right mind, it goes to their families. And we have mentioned continually, how are these families going to be able to also make this right decision if they're thinking about healthcare bills and they're thinking about all the effects and restraints that they have had on themselves? So we are trying to look at all the objectives, the family and the individual, and I believe that the proposition has completely ignored these facts. So to basically sum up what I've said, the opposition has brought up a few major points, specifically about the healthcare system and the role of doctors and how we can really look at the treatment and the procedure and how it really is viable. And the proposition has more brought up points through this debate about the individual rights and the pain that these people feel. But we asked them to look at the logical aspect of this. Thank you.
I thank the lady for her remarks, and now I call on San Mattelli to conclude this debate for the opposition.
4 minutes. In the last speech by my opponent, she said that we've never seen anyone suffer. She said that we've never seen anyone die. Well, I don't think she was there when I was by my grandmother's bed, holding her hand when she died. I don't think she was there when my grandfather passed 2 weeks later. I've seen people die, and I think it's immature and foolish to pretend like one side has a monopoly on love, that one side has a monopoly on mercy. We all care about these people, but it's about how to best treat them, not about who loves more. And that is an immature and disgusting tactic. But so I'm going to go on and maliciously rip their case apart. First, I'm going to start with the issue of potential abuses. As we said earlier, a government must not create a system that can create an incentive for a doctor or government to kill a patient. That's fundamentally wrong. Their response, no, no, no. Doctors would never do that, but they've never apparently been to a hospital where someone gets turfed out because their insurance doesn't meet the need. If these doctors are all complete altruists, I'm not saying they're not good people. I'm just saying that it's a business, and it's going to be business as usual if we allow them to put death into the equation. Families will too. That's not an easy thing to think, but in the system that we live, it would be horrible. If you want to talk about an undignified death, talk about a system that incentivizes your family trying to get you to submit to euthanasia so that you're not a financial burden to them. That's an undignified death. Onward to freedom. First of all, the idea that a government can't restrict treatment, we already do. You can't take a vitamin for a stubbed toe, even if you choose to. A doctor can't drill a hole in your head to release the demons, because that's not an AMA-sanctioned practice, even if both you and the doctor consent to that. This is already a precedent we have. It's not something that's new. And so and at the bottom line, you always have the right to not go to the doctor. You always have the right to say, I want to stop treatment. And at any time, you can do this. We're not restricting an individual, we're restricting a doctor. We're saying a doctor cannot prescribe a lethal dose of a drug. You can't prescribe a drug that'll kill someone when they're fully healthy, and you can't do it at any point in their life. And that's the stand that the opposition is going to stand by. Third is this concept of dignity. As we said, it's a meaningless concept. It's not, because the medical community has roundly come up against this as a standard. We know what it means, but because it's so subjective, because it's so subject to religion, because it's so subject to personal, because what you may call dignified, I may not, it's not a good standard. And moreover, it's already subsumed by the concept of autonomy, that a person has to be made aware of their treatments and that they can stop treatment at any time. When you already have this standard in place, the standard of dignity has no role. Thus, and secondly, medicine itself is undignified. As my partner pointed out, getting out of dignity isn't the most important thing. We trade it every day. Getting out of a small car is undignified. In medicine, getting a colonoscopy is is undignified, but I still hope all of you do. Birth is undignified, but we still do it because we choose to, because we trade dignity sometimes for treatment. And if somebody doesn't want to have treatment, then they can stop getting that. In the end, I hope that you will not side with my opponents who believe that we don't care. We care just as much as they do. We care enough to get past our initial fear of death, to get past the stigma, and think about this like we would think about every other medical treatment. Do we really want to allow doctors to prescribe death? Is death a drug that we want to make approved by the FDA? The opposition says no. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman for his remarks, and now I call upon Ava to conclude the debate.
Well, what we usually do in the reply speech, and what I'm going to do just in a little bit different form, is we pose three very important questions, and we see what both sides answer to this. Well, those three very important questions in this debate are: first one, can fallible people execute euthanasia? Second one, are there possibilities of abuse? And third one, what is a dignified death? It's just that I feel that this debate concerns the people, most of all the people that are in this situation and that are suffering. And this is why I'm going to analyze this debate from their point of view. And for those 3 minutes that I have now here, I'm going to be this person that is nearly dying. I want to die. And then my mother sits beside me and says, no, you can't. Maybe the doctors made the wrong diagnosis. Maybe you're not even dying. Maybe they intentionally did the wrong diagnosis because you caused them too much and they want to have better performance judging something like that and something like this. How would I feel if I heard this? Well, what the government side here says is that the role of the doctors is to help, and the doctor should do what is in the interest of the person, and the doctor at this point should do what I feel is the best thing for me to do. Because the role of the doctor is not to preserve life by any cost. The role of the doctor is to help by any cost. And even if doctor as a fallible person is wrong about what makes me suffer, I'm not wrong about the fact that I'm suffering. And this is what we should remember. No people are wrong about the fact that they suffer, and no people should be told that maybe their wish to die is wrong. I still want to die, and the next reason why I couldn't die that we've heard from the opposition side is that, well, maybe you're not in right mind. Maybe the parents or somebody wants to get rid of you so that they will have less cost or something like this. Maybe, basically, if you don't agree with the way the medical system works, well, you still have the right to do it on your own. First of all, what we say here, if I want to die, I say I want to die. And this is how the euthanasia system works. We don't collect people who would go through the hospitals and say, you die, you don't, you die, you don't. No. We listen to the person that is suffering. We'll listen to him or her. And when he says, I want this to be over, we say, okay. And this is what we do. And if we say you can do it, but you can step out of the healing process and you can do it on your own, what we do is we only inflict more of his or her suffering. I want to die, but I can't, because the opposition side says that the dignified death is not necessarily what I or anybody else consider a dignified death. And that dignified death might be the one where you die naturally. What the government side says and what I say is that my death is only mine. I have the right to decide how am I gonna die. I have the right to decide when I want to die. And I have the right to decide if to die naturally is dignified for me or if it's not. And you've heard 3 answers the opposition offered to a person who is dying. You can die because maybe it's the wrong diagnosis and somebody is abusing you. You can die because maybe we just want to get rid of the cost that you're making to us, and maybe we're the bad people who are making you die. You can die because maybe you don't understand what a dignified death is. I think if I will be in a position where I will want to die, I don't want those 3 things to be the last things I hear from the people I love. And I believe that the opposition side agrees with me.
All right, permission to cross the aisle.
We do the break.